Hello and welcome back to the Middling Along podcast. This episode is a little bit different. Very happy to welcome our first ever male guest. He also happens to be my long-suffering husband, Stephen Thomas. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Emma. I am honoured and quite nervous to be here. as I in my ears, I hear many of your listeners going, "A man? A man?
A very loud man."
On the Middling Along podcast? No.
Well, there's a first time for everything. So yeah, we chatted about doing this over Christmas, and some strange, perverse part of us decided that it would be quite probably an interesting time capsule for our kids as well to listen back to at some point if we stash this away for posterity, in case they're ever wondering whether we did actually get on or not. But yeah, so it would be interesting to, I guess, kind of hear from you about sort of menopause, perimenopause from the point of view of a partner, a husband, and what it's like to be on the other side of that dynamic. So yeah, I don't know. Can we maybe start off by telling us what your, I guess, sort of perception or understanding of menopause would have been if we rewound the clock back sort of 2.5 years before I started any of this crazy podcasting business?
Well, as a man, let me tell you about the menopause.
Okay,
caveats aside. That was a joke, by the way. So one of the things I has found that has been very interesting is learning how much ignorance there is, both in men and societally, about the menopause. And I think actually more recently, thanks to all the wonderful reading that you're doing, I'm learning more and more about the sort of the systemic ignorance and actually sexism about everything around menstrual health and women's bodies, which I think is a real eye-opener. The fact, as I was reading in one of your guest's book the other night, that there is any kind of pain relief under the sun. If you're a man, you've got a sports injury, it's right, you've got very, very specific, take this up, do this, take that. But for menstrual pain, there is over-the-counter ibuprofen and a hot water bottle. And it feels like actually there's a lot of investment. And for some reason, I don't know why, it seems to be one of the subjects that men are nervous talking about. And then as we live in a patriarchal society, that has made it that it's just something that isn't discussed enough until wonderful people like you and others like you are coming along and saying, this is really important, this affects half the population, what we're doing about it. And I think it's interesting to reflect back about how much of my sort of early life and childhood, how that coloured for me what the menopause was, and thinking about what my mum went through when there wasn't support, there wasn't education. And so that was quite a difficult experience, I'm sure, for her, but it was something we never talked about as well. And I think that led me to believe that this time was going to come in your life and it wasn't going to be fun. And so it was very scary leading up to this point.
Yeah, so you're, I guess, you're that only role model or kind of exemplar of menopause was kind of what your mum went through at that point. And from what you as a kind of a teenager, I guess, at that point would have seen her sort of struggling with, but presumably not really understanding at the time that that is what she was going through herself.
Yeah, I think there was talk about hot flushes and there was the heat thing, which everyone associates. I remember there being a book, and it was like one of those Doreen Kindersley books that she'd got from the library, and it was like menopause in big blue letters, which I never looked at, but it wasn't talked about. But obviously I was a teenager. There were two other kids. My dad was an academic that was often lost in an academic world in his own, so not always paying attention and being sensitive. He was a good man, but not always being fully in tune with everyone's emotions. So it could be quite a volatile time. And I, thinking back, I've got to be careful what I say because my mum might be listening, but there wasn't any kind of outlet. There wasn't any place that she could discuss that. I mean, the nearest was things like, Weight Watchers or kind of keep, it was the 80s. So it was like there were groups. There weren't really women's groups in the way that there are now. Well, there might have been, but not in, suburban Edinburgh. The women's groups were going round to her friend's house to have a cup of tea and sit in the conservatory and sort of have a rest or have a glass of wine. But there wasn't any guidance on health. There wasn't any guidance on drinking. I don't think it was. I mean, I wasn't aware, but I don't remember there being anything on, bone density. It was just like, this is a time where your mother may be volatile.
You're gonna get a bit hot and a bit cross.
Yeah, and like, and she did, and she threw. I remember a pizza being thrown, but also clearly, was going through a lot of really emotional stuff at the time, both with some children leaving home and just that time in life, and also she was going back to teaching in a really, really tough primary school in a deprived area in Edinburgh. So there was a lot going on, like a lot of stress, and actually it's just really interesting. There was not, it was sort of, it felt like, to me, from my perspective, I don't know what it's like from her perspective, but it was sort of something that a woman got on with quietly. We didn't discuss it. It was really annoying because it caused these hot flushes, and she would get upset, but there wasn't really a way of even being supportive and sensitive, because it was almost like, right, you go away and
the elephant in the room.
Yeah, that's the menopause. We don't understand that. That's your business. Go and deal with that in a locked room, and don't bother anyone. And
I think that's a common kind of refrain from people of my generation, our generation, in terms of what their mothers went through. That it was very much kind of it wasn't really overtly discussed. People did just kind of muddle through as best they could. They might have gone on to HRT, then they might not have done. 20 years ago there was the big HRT scare, and I think sort of like a 50% drop off in terms of people who had been taking HRT and then suddenly stopped overnight because of the kind of health concerns. So probably that did kind of impact a lot of people of her generation. So I know that my mum was on HRT at some point because she had a full hysterectomy, and I don't know exactly at what point that was, but yeah, again, it was just one of those things where, I can kind of remember that it happened, but again, just wasn't really discussed at all within the kind of the family dynamics. So yeah, I mean, luckily we have moved on quite a lot since that point, but
also not, because I think up until this point, I'm very lucky to cohabit with someone that is doing all this wonderful, menopause research and advocacy, and learning through osmosis, and sometimes picking up a book that I should read,
or being shouted at,
or being well, not as much as I thought, but it has been a realization, and I'm sure this is true for countless partners out there, not just men. It could be an age differential in a same-sex relationship or anything like that, but that for a lot of us, we still have what I would call like a sort of a secondary school education about the menopause, in terms of, like, I remember learning about sex from was it like Ross Beard, this guy in the first year of secondary school. He like told me all about it. It's like that was worst people to learn from, or kind of
I'm fairly sure he didn't tell you anything about the menopause.
He didn't know anything about it, and like that was a really bad source of reference, is to learn from your peer group at an age where actually no one knows anything about sex. But coming up to it, all I knew really was what was coloured from that time, and kind of what I picked up from, I guess, bits of culture, and probably 1980s kind of community. Yeah, and so it's just like, look, this is a time when you're going to get angry, you're going to be completely irrational, you're going to throw things at me, sex is going to stop, this is the end, this is and I need to be stoic and just let you get on for it as you wither on the vine, and kind of set things on fire or whatever. But it's not been like that. It's
good. So in terms of, I guess, the stuff that you've picked up by osmosis and by talking to me, what is there anything that let's say a couple of things. First of all, is there anything that's particularly surprised you? And second of all, if anybody, there are any kind of partners, husbands listening to this, what advice would you kind of give to them in terms of trying to get educated and support the person that they're in a relationship with.
So I guess the first bit of advice is don't listen to me at all or other men. Go out and seek, listen to this podcast, or go and talk to your partner, or ask around. Actually, I think what's been really nice is it's no longer a word that if you say it at a party or a social engagement that you're gonna, the music's gonna stop and everyone's gonna talk. It's like, okay, people are talking about HRT and that. I think the big thing I've learned, the huge thing I've learned is, like, it's not the menopause. Like, I think a lot of, not everyone, but there's a majority of people go through similar experiences in life, and so they break it down in stages. I mean, puberty can be very variable and can, but you get hair and there's general things that happen. I think the menopause is far, far, far more variable than I knew anything about. In terms of, clearly for some people, it's not. I'm not saying it's easy or enjoyable, but there are like positive, menopauses where people are well informed, they have the right kind of nutrients, they work with it, and actually they kind of embrace the life change. And post menopause, not having period pain every month, like, it's not without some benefits. However, there are other menopauses which people go through intense physical pain, and I think worse, from what I can understand, is the sort of the psychological loneliness. Like, there are just various conditions and various menopauses where I've lost track. Is it 96? You'll know. 98 or some conditions. I lose.
What symptoms?
Yeah, like,
I think it varies depending on which kind of article you're reading or which organisation's website you're looking at. But somewhere upwards of 48, I think, is the kind of the middle ground. But yeah, I think it's changing all the time.
So you can be in pain, you can have dry eyes, you can have knock-on symptoms. It can be affecting how you exit. And I think more and more, the more I learn about health in general, there's this idea about, we've, as the medical sort of ethos that we've all grown up in, and this is not just for doctors, is like, very Western, and you treat the symptom. And I think more and more people are graduating to, like, well, look at the symptom is one thing, but look at the system, right? Okay, you're showing this symptom of something, but actually what's happening with your sleep system or your endocrine system or something else. And menopause is such a vast shift of the endocrine system, the physical system, everything, that is just going to be very, very unique to everyone. And so this idea of, like, coming, having like a partner's menopause pack where it's like, well, you need to just give them the hot water bottle of chocolate. I don't know, that might be okay for someone, but it's not going to work for someone else that's really, really struggling. And I think what I've taken from some of the tiny scratches of learning is just to be very, very open-minded about what can happen, what it can be like. And I think, support through the menopause is going to be unique, and it has to be tailored to the person that's doing it. And a lot of things, I think, is actually the listening, and to take away the default patriarchal voice that sort of says, yes, dear, of course, it's just that's just the menopause. Actually listen to what people know their own bodies well, they know their own symptoms. And yes, there might be periods of emotion, and there might be periods where, some of the symptoms are feeling a bit, I don't know, irrational or emotional or whatever. But it's like, that's only one bit, and there needs to be a process of listening and patience and going beyond that, because there could be vast other things that are happening, and some of those are potentially serious if not taken seriously. And I think that's where it leads to the really dark side of menopause, is the number of people that are struggling and could get some kind of help, but are pushed aside and sort of left on, just left out, and kind of left to deal with it without any validity. And there's a lot of, as one of the books was saying, the amount of gaslighting in the sort of the medical fraternity, for probably unintentionally but systemic again, that just against women. It's like, well, if you're going to show up there as a woman, or as a black woman, even, it's even worse for you, and say, I think this is wrong with me, you have to fight 3 times as hard. Whereas if I go in as a man and say, I need this,
well, that was, so the book that you're talking about is Rebel Bodies by Sarah Graham, who's also appeared on the podcast. And I think it's in somewhere later on in the book, she talks about kind of experiences of people women who'd gone into an appointment and actually taken a male supporter with them, and that the kind of the attitude of that GP or that doctor had changed completely just because there was a male body in the room. They didn't even need to say anything, but just the fact of them being there changed the dynamic. So again, maybe that is something where, if you're a partner, if you're a male partner, actually agreeing, volunteering to go to a GP appointment, with your partner, with your spouse, could be a real game changer, and actually, again, shows that sort of solidarity in terms of, being serious about helping them get any kind of help and support that they might need.
That's amazing to learn that men have these wonderful uses of just being, if we can just sit down and shut up and be roomy, we're very, very useful and welcome and can make life better for sometimes maybe. Can I turn the tables and ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Or is that? So one of the things I'm interested in, because I'm probably a bit more woo than you.
You're very woo.
I've got a proper job as well. Is how you see this period of the perimenopause, the menopause, and midlife and beyond midlife, how that fits into your sort of psychological makeup in terms of how you view yourself. And I suppose what I'm trying to lead to is, I feel in our culture we've lost the archetype of the wise woman. It used to be a very, very tribal thing, and there's a lot of stuff about actually we're losing our community, we're losing our sort of tribal structure. But the wise old man still exists, the old professor, that's still. But the wise woman's become the mad bat with a bunch of cats, But we seem to have lost the ability to look to an elder generation of women. I mean, there are still, them out there.
I think it's coming back though. I think things are changing because we're an aging population. The demographic of sort of women in that kind of perimenopause and postmenopause age bracket is the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. I think the sort of, people of my generation, that Gen X generation, who are the ones who are kind of being more vocal and speaking out. We are the most educated cohort going through this, and we are going to be working longer than our sort of predecessors. And so I think there is a move to kind of reclaim, claw back some of that, away from kind of gendered ageism. People talk a lot about going through the sort of perimenopause, menopause transition, and kind of maybe finding your confidence, giving less of a whatever about what people think of you, kind of coming out the other side and having a bit of having that freedom in a way, that sort of release from having to conform to a certain sense of looking a certain way, being attractive in a way. You go past that, and then you can put your energy into other things.
And is that something that you feel like you're experiencing and living through? Like, because I remember a lot of people saying things like, "Oh, I still feel the same as I did when I was 25. Like, nothing's changed internally." But do you think that this period, do you feel like do you feel inside like you were young, you were old, you were wise? Like, how would you? And do you think there's been a difference in certainly the last 5 or 10 years that has been impacted by not only what you're potentially going through in the perimenopause, but also the conversations that you've been having through this podcast and your work?
It's very complex, and I think it has to be kind of underlined by me kind of recognizing the privilege that I have in terms of having various things. So like having had a relatively easy ride of it so far, touch wood, through kind of perimenopause, being kind of educated because I've taken it upon myself to do that sort of through the podcast, being able-bodied and not having any serious health issues, being sort of relatively comfortably off financially. That kind of means that I kind of come at it from a very good place, if you like. So and also I'm kind of at an interesting inflection point where kind of our kids are a little bit older. They're 12 and 9, so need us a bit less than kind of that kind of first maybe 10 years of child rearing, which is really intense, and you're kind of putting a lot into that, and not at the same time working near enough full time a lot of the time, so not really having a lot of headspace to think about these kind of things. So I guess this sort of 2-year window or whatever has been a time for me to kind of really think about, my health, and also reassessing what I want to do career wise, business wise, having a bit more flexibility to do that, because the kind of family pressure is less demanding, although there have been kind of other pressures. But yeah, I kind of wandered off on a bit of a tangent there. I don't know. I mean, yes, I think it is. I think it's an invitation to reassess. So, in the past, that's kind of been branded as your midlife crisis or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. I think for a lot of us, we get to this point of life and we realize that we're probably kind of, if we're lucky, halfway through, and it's like, well, what am I going to do with the other half if I'm lucky enough to have another 48, 49, 50 years on the planet? So I think, there is a certain amount of soul searching and thinking about stuff, if you're lucky enough to kind of have the luxury, time, and the bandwidth to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm very aware of the privilege, but I think, just to say, I think there's been a lot of just good. I know it's not necessarily easy, but actually from that, maybe it is midlife, maybe it's recognizing active quality time left in your life where you're completely mobile and completely independent and can make those decisions. Well, it is decreasing, and depending on how long you live, actually you maybe got less of it than you think. So it's kind of like there's less messing around. I see you sort of being more focused, enjoying life, enjoying being healthy, and I guess being braver about talking to people and doing the things that you want to do, which is always really exciting to see someone do that. So from that side of it, there's been a lot of good. Touch wood, we'll see. Can I ask you a couple more questions?
Go on then. I can always edit them out.
Yeah.
You have the power.
Okay. So you asked me about advice, and I guess my advice was like, well, go and listen to this podcast. So if someone was going through the menopause and they had a partner, male, female, otherwise, who wasn't going through the menopause, who didn't understand that much about it, like, what would you? And they came to you. They said, "Dear Emma, my partner's going through the menopause. I'm a bit scared. What should I do?" What would be the kind of the three things that you would sort of say, or three areas to start reading, researching, or talking? I don't know. How would you answer that email?
I think we're lucky in that there is a huge amount more easily accessible information out there. But having said that, I can appreciate if you don't know where to start, that might be a bit overwhelming. There are some great books on the topic, so I'm happy to. What I might do is actually just list a few in the show notes. That kind of some really good kind of basic primers, and that's not to say you necessarily have to read them from cover to cover, but dip into them, try and get a sense of what might be going on, and use that as a a springboard for a conversation. So I took the initiative and I went and I got this book. Maybe we could sit down and talk about what's happening for you. Really, there's no substitute for actually sitting down and spending the time talking to your partner and actually finding out what is actually going on. We both know, if you're busy working, your parents, there's not an awful lot of kind of couple time. So I think prioritizing that, we've done some important work on kind of prioritizing spending time together, which maybe we'll get into in another episode. But it like a relationship, a marriage, or whatever, takes work, and actually, if you kind of you take your foot off the gas on that side of things, and relationships can really suffer. So without trying to sound too condescending, I think it is really important to prioritize putting time aside to actually properly sit down and kind of do active listening or whatever, and finding out what's really going on with your partner. And I guess just making sure that they know that you're there for them, whether, like we said, whether that's kind of going along with them to GP appointments, or if they decide that they're gonna kind of maybe have a bit of a health reboot, what can you do to support them? Can you, if they want to give up alcohol for a month, can you do that with them, or at least kind of be supportive and sort of cheer them along? Or if they're want to take up a kind of a new exercise regime, how can you support that? How can you help them to carve out time? Because I think that's particularly as women, where we really struggle is to prioritize ourselves and to just to kind of really make ourselves worthy of spending time on. So if your significant other can help you to enable that on an ongoing basis, then I think that's quite powerful too.
That's great advice. I should probably follow some of that. So
you don't do too bad.
I need the book. I don't think I've read the right kind of books on it. I've read lots of websites. The books I like and my friends like, the mental load book that had pictures in it and cartoons. So someone needs to write.
So someone needs to write
a
the
picture
menopause
book
version of that.
with bullet points for men. But
I think there is.
Is there?
I will find it. I'll find a
I need to
link.
get that.
There is a graphic novel
Ooh,
about menopause.
cool. That sounds right up my street.
Yeah. Okay.
The second one was talking to you and being aware. I don't know, actually. I think we talk enough. But you've mentioned a bit about, and I think it's difficult for you because I'm not sure. Like what I find is quite confusing in this landscape is it's not like you are here, you're on day 73 of the perimenopause. In 2 weeks' time, you will be in the
It's not like the little app you get with babies.
Yeah, when you have a baby, it's like
link 4.
Yeah, it's now a grapefruit.
Now you're gonna be banging your head against the wall.
It's like, watch out, stage 5, she's going to start throwing things. So I noticed you have said things like, brain fog has been like a symptom that you've encountered, and I think there's certainly been days where you've been tired. And I don't know if I want to talk about it, but I know your menstrual pattern has been uneven.
Yeah, very common to have irregular kind of periods, and kind of for that to be completely unpredictable, especially in early perimenopause.
Are there other things that you're enduring at the moment that you're not talking about, like headaches?
You know about my noise sensitivity. I'm sure that's a perimenopause thing. It's called misphonia.
You've had that ever since I've known
you. I don't know that I have.
But so what like loud noises, or just too much noise? You need more quiet time. What is the what?
I think just that there are certain times where sort of noise, and I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are nodding along, like things like loud chewing, or just like if I'm working and there's a kind of noise in the background, or even like the kids just being noisy. Sometimes it's absolutely fine, and then sometimes that kind of loud kids chatter in the background just seems to really put me on edge, and I think that's another thing about the kind of the sort of the shape shifting side of kind of menopause, perimenopause symptoms, is that right? One day something might be absolutely fine, and another day, it might just send you over the edge. I don't know. One day you kind of your boobs might be fine. The next day you might find particularly you've got kind of boob tenderness, and you just be sitting there kind of stressing like, oh god, have I got breast cancer? Is there something wrong with me? Or the times that I've missed important meetings. I think it's very easy to kind of to worry, I've got early onset dementia or something, or what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this thing that everyone else seems to kind of to cope with? But I think we're quite hard on ourselves sometimes, and also sometimes if things are happening kind of at random times and not consistently, it's also kind of hard to join the dots.
Yeah, no, I mean it sounds like you need to. Well, it sounds like it's a very difficult thing to approach and make sense of, and I tend to find things that I can't, things like pain or discomfort that don't have a really logical explanation, or emotional stuff like kind of trauma or grief. Why am I feeling sad? I find them very destabilizing, because like if I drop a hammer on my toe, ow, I feel pain, I'm angry. That works in my very simple sort of mammal brain. If suddenly I'm sad because I don't know, my father died 8 years ago and I don't know, blah, 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 or something like that, and now I'm just feeling sad on a random walk through the woods. It's like, well, I'm in the woods and it's nice and I'm happy. Why should I don't know? That doesn't. So trying to join together symptoms.
I think as well for men, there's often a tendency to want to fix things.
Yeah.
And be very practical, and that. But yeah, I think this is something where not necessarily everything has an easy, straightforward fix, and so actually a lot of the time it is just about listening and kind of understanding where somebody is at. and kind of, asking them how can I support you, not just necessarily assuming or kind of offering what you might think is the kind of the obvious solution. Is that whole thing about, isn't it? Do you want comfort or do you want solutions? And I think a lot of the time we just want kind of comfort and understanding.
I think I learned seeing the graph of hormones. That was quite an eye opener as well. Seeing how jaggy it is. Like sometimes you can have a real spike, right?
A roller coaster.
Even though it's going down, you can have a real spike of estrogen or something. All of these things that we know have a massive impact on the way that you feel, and we think it's normal when we see teenage boys and girls sort of having strong reactions, but we assume by the time people are in their 40s or 50s or even younger, as we know menopause comes to younger people, that they know how to deal with this all. So that was a big eye opener, that it might not be the same thing that you need at every point along the journey.
And that can be kind of scary too, just feeling like you don't have control over your emotions or over your body, right? It's like your body is kind of turning on you sometimes, particularly if you get those kind of awful flashes of kind of irrational rage, or lost count of the times that I've shouted at the kids for doing something inconsequential and then just realised, okay, that's probably just a hormonal thing that Anyway, we're kind of up to time. Okay. I don't know how.
I hope I've done okay. I hope this doesn't have to go live. It can be private. I hope I've been representing the uneducated who are gradually evolving, crawling out of the primordial swamp. And I'm sure, I hope people have got to hear a bit from you, because I'm sure they want to know more about you and what you're doing. But as ever, it's been wonderful to talk about it, and I've learned a lot. And I'm going to probably in private ask some more questions. And good to know about your noise sensitivity. I remember co-working with you in lockdown. I think we lasted 7.5 minutes before I was informed that I breathed too loud. So
I think the listeners are on my side on that one.
Okay. Probably.
We'll leave it there.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your patience and for having
on.
me on. And apologise if for being a man on this, and for men anywhere that are ignorant, but we are useful as meat coming with you to the doctor's office. So I will try and definitely do that.
Warm bodies.
And we can, and I'm proof that we can be educated. And actually, the more educated I've become through you, the less scary it is.
I think that's the key takeaway, isn't it?
For me. It's been like, I'm no longer worried. I'm like actually really looking forward to like the next 10 years. I feel like life is beginning and blossoming, because it's like, this is just a thing now. And while some of it's uncontrollable and some of it, but it's like, it's not this like cutting off point. It's not this scary thing. And actually, there's too much ignorance, and ignorance breeds fear, and then the fear just reinforces not talking about it or acting in that other way. So as I'm going back into the full-time work now, it's my job too to try and be the best ally I can, and understand that for certain women of a certain age, it's like there are going to be days where they just need, they may need answers or solutions, or they just may need to be listened to, or they just may need time and space and understanding that not everyone is going to be operating 100% for every day of their life, which is a perfectly normal and reasonable thing.
And on that note, we'll finish up for today. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Middling Along podcast. Do remember to subscribe to be notified when our next episode is live. And why not visit the blog at www.middlingalong.com to sign up to my newsletter as well. I do hope you enjoyed listening today. If you did, I'd be really grateful if you would consider leaving a short review, as that helps people find the podcast and helps get it noticed. Hope you can join us next time. Goodbye for now.